Welcome to my yearly attempt to get into a bulge game in December. This year I'm starting a bit late. December 16th is a big day. Tried to shoot for that, but didn't quite make it. But I think I'm going to get it going here. And just to start out, there are bulge games. I've played bulge games my entire life. I do actually, you see, I have what many consider the original classic here, Battle of the Bulge, 1965. That's the one I played as a teenager, uh, which is a classic. I look at this, and this brings back memories here. The map, even, it's different. But that's not what I'm playing this year. It's been a while since I played it. Actually, real quick, there is Panzer Battles, Panzer Campaigns from WDS, War Game Design Studio. I think I actually posted a number of videos playing a scenario of that at the beginning or the end of last year, trying to correspond to the bulge. This is battalion level, really detailed. I have a number of Tiller WDS games that I'd love to get back into or run in parallel to regular board games. But I also own Ardennes 44, Simonich's series, and I was tempted to pull that out and play that because I've got a bunch of 44 series games, or 43. I've got pretty much all of them except for the France one, so that would be a good system to learn. I was also considering playing this one. I recently picked this up in the last few months from Compass Games. Really looks nice. So I was skimming the rules there. It seemed manageable. I was tempted by that too, but there was one game that, again, I grew up with. It came a decade or more after Bulge 65, and of course that is Battle for the Ardennes by Simulation Publications from 1978. I remember I had that game when I was younger, sold all my games, and then somehow obtained another copy. It's in a Ziploc right now in storage. I can't really dig it out in time, but this started as a quad here: Saint Vith, Clairvaux, Celles. My French is horrible. And Sedan, and it covered. Actually, it also, in addition to the Battle of the Bulge, it covered the 1940 German attack through the Ardennes against the French, and has a campaign game for that. So you had these three from Bulge of 44, this one from 40, and you could have a campaign game for both. So this is what I ended up choosing here. And there's been some reprints. I think TSR did it, and Decision Games. Now, in my case, I'm going with the original SPI, just for memories. And you've got some images here. I've actually got a Vassal mod I'm using, but I kind of wish it used these counters, but these are classic SPI counters. Only somebody who grew up with this kind of stuff could appreciate it, I would imagine, with today's counters today. And then the map is classic SPI. Yep, there's one of the, I don't know, I love these maps. These just bring back fond memories here. This coloring. And of course, today's maps are a lot more detailed, etc. But, there's always a soft spot here for the SPI. Whole series of games using that. Now, Battle for the Ardennes was an interesting, different game from SPI, if I understand it right. It was actually independently developed, and then SPI wanted to bring it on board, so it didn't kind of match some of the games, like Westwall Quad and some other those World War II SPI games they'd already made. It really had its own set of rules, and surprisingly enough, for 1978, these are quite good rules in my opinion. They're quite crunchy. They're not too oversimplified like some of the games that SPI was putting out around that time. So what I want to do in this video after that intro is, and I know there's so many other Battle of the Bulge games. I've got Time for Trumpets. I've got something for Command Magazine. I know a number of people are playing. I think it's Battalion Combat Series. I forgot the name, but you know, the Dean Essex series. Yeah, BCS series, and I know there's some SCS ones over there too, and Ardennes 44. I think I forgot what they called it. So, not downplaying any of those. I'm just sharing the ones I was exposed to, and like I said, this one's always had a soft spot for me here. So this year I'm gonna dabble with this game here. And so for the remainder of this video, yeah, it's all here. There is a vassal mod, like I said. I went out and got it. The map is Classic Spy. I'm kind of sad. I mean, I understand what the person did with these counters. You can auto-generate them in vassal, but I just would have loved to, if I had the time to scan and use the actual graphics. But this is perfectly fine here. I've got this, and I'm pronouncing it wrong, the SPI Quad battle up here. But what I wanted to do in this video, let's see, I've already done 6 minutes. Just kind of wanted to give you a taste for the rules and you know, some of the game here before I actually trying to decide launch into a game. I don't think I can do the whole campaign, but I may choose either St. Vith or Clairvaux. Or I may continue playing this one out. I've already started. This is the first turn, and I'm already 3 turns in, and this is pretty much a free-for-all. And actually, Revolution Games has a game titled just Sellies also, which has good reviews as a beginner game. But let's go ahead and take a look at Battle for the Ardennes, and you do see the 4 quad games, and there are campaign game for both 44 and 40. And the counters are pretty simple. You've got combat factor, movement factor. The unit identifier is important because there's a divisional integrity rule. So if all the units in a division 3 are in the same attack, you get a 1-column shift, and if they're all stacked together, we'll see it, you get a 1-column shift in defense. So, and again, we're talking 1978 here. So, that's interesting. So we got divisional integrity. We've also got artillery units, and you've got to work with them. They can be in battery or out of battery. Obviously, when they're in battery, they can fire, but they can't move. When they're out of battery, they can move, but they can't fire. And there's a timing issue with the sequence of play on that, which you've got to get correct so they aren't they don't become useless here. We got march mode markers, so when units want to strategically or road move, you have to mark them, and the rules are can't be adjacent, can't stack. Kind of reminds me of Library of Napoleonics battles I'm playing. Blowing bridges, building bridges is a big component of this game. We got out of supply, we got some air power, German air power, and Allied air power. They can do some stuff. Improve positions, units can dig in. They can disperse. The campaign game, I think the Allies can do air supply, which is helpful because when units become isolated, they start losing a step. So let's look at the sequence of play here, and you'll see that nuance I was talking about with at least artillery and march mode. So I'll zoom it in here a little. Basically, yeah, every player turn begins with mutual supply determination. The Germans actually have a supply shortage table, which, let's see. Yeah, here it is. Let me pull that across here. It's in the vassal mod. And we see it broken out by scenarios and times here. So like the Sellies one I'm playing here, every turn after the first turn, the Germans roll, and on a 4 through 6, they roll again here. And these units are out of supply for the turn, which I think is basically say they move at half and they attack at half. But you also see it here for St. Vith, the Clairvaux scenario, and the campaign game too. So this is a consideration here. Then the air power phase. Air power can help with defense or attack, with column shift, but they can also do this interdiction, which is interesting, where they take the road out of commission for a supply point of view, and they can potentially disperse units that are on a road. And if they're in march mode, they can even lose a step. So air power is a concern there. And then you do see the actual movement phase. They can build improved positions, start building improved position in bridges. This is the only time batteries can change their mode voluntarily from in battery, out battery. This is the only time that units can voluntarily go into march mode or drop out of march mode. Now combat may have an effect on this and force them out, but then there's movement. And it really is slow going if you're not on the roads, especially for mechanized units. There's a separate for mech units versus let's see what we got here. Yeah, weather table, hold on. So here it is, terrain effects. So you do see here we've got mech units and non-mech. In parens are special times. Normally it's these movement point costs not in parens. But like in this game, on the 17th, ground freeze takes effect. And so you use these lesser ones in parens. And you do see that mech units slow down pretty fast with broken and light woods. You're seeing movements of 6, maybe 5, and then non-mech is 3. So they can get slowed down if they're not on a road. So the roads are pretty much channeling. Towns and cities help the defender out. West wall helps the Germans. River hex size halved when attacking across. There are ford hex sizes too. And bridges. Yeah, and there's parens. So it can be slow going. Here you see a blown bridge. Okay. So you have to decide that, and then you're in the movement segment. And then we go in the combat segment. It's voluntary, not required. You can be selective. Artillery can add to the attack and to the defense as long as they're in battery and in range. And I think in general it's 2 or 3 hexes range. And then continuing on, we see that then we've got a whole bridge phase. This is where you can attempt to blow bridges, or bridge markers are finished building too. So for a game from this time period, that's pretty complex, pretty impressive here. We look at movement, pretty much standard, like I said, mech and non-mech. You can move into a Zoc, then you have to stop. You can leave a Zoc, but only to a non-Zoc hex, and then re-enter. And you have to pay 1 movement point to leave an enemy Zoc, and movement points are precious. And mechanized units can ignore artillery unit zones of controls. So, and you can always move 1 hex. And there you go, totally. If you're out of supply, have movement, rounding fractions up. Okay, and then artillery movement. If you're out of battery, you can move. And you can only do it voluntary then. So you do see the limitations there. Then we have terrain. Like I said, there's a separate column for armored or mech and non-mech. Actually, armored infantry, interestingly enough, for the turn can say, I'm going to be infantry and only have a movement point cost movement points of 3, but then they move on the non-mech chart. So that's another way. So apparently they can either move as mech and get their full 5, but pay mech costs, or they can move as 3 but move with non-mech costs. So that's a interesting shift there for armored infantry, they call it. And they can cross unbridged river hex sides, uses all their movement, but a unit moving mech or an armor unit has to cross at a bridge. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, lesser costs with the freeze. Here's the armored infantry special movement I talked about. Here's march mode movement, where you can move faster if you put yourself in it, but there's some limits here. Got to be on a road, can't be stacked with anybody, can't be an enemy Zoc, zone of control. got to have a movement point allowance of more than one, and if you're out of supply, you can't do it. And this is a good way to get people up to the front. All mechanized units get a 3 times multiplier. So roads only cost 1 MP, period, no matter which movement you're doing. It's just if I'm doing march mode, I get 3 times for mechanized units. German, French are twice, and then American and British non-mech units are 6 times, representing trucks, like these units. Those are non-mech, so if they go in march mode, they can move 18. But you got to be on a road, and here's the things. You can't stack, you can't be adjacent. These two are in opposite roads. You can move through what they call a combat mode units who aren't in march mode. But if you do move through them, you pay the mech cost for the terrain. You can enter zones of control, enemy zones of control, but then you're stuck. You can't leave them. And if you get in combat, you have some penalties. Here's zones of control. You only exert ZOC on the road hexes when in march mode. And yeah, there is units in march mode. You can advance after combat only along a road. If you get a detrimental effect, you got to be placed in combat mode. And any losses has to start with you. Stacking is basically 3 units. And it applies at the end of the friendly movement phase and throughout the combat phase, so you can move through other units. No stacking in march mode. Bridges, you can only cross 1 at a time. So you do see that slowing effect out here. And then they have some, like I summarized, zones of control, and for retreat and supply, it's negated by a friendly unit if it's there. Some units have parentheses for their combat factor. They can only defend, and then it can only move into an enemy zone of control if with another unit. And then we do mention again, the artillery zones of control don't have an effect on mechanized units. Combat, here we go. Combat is voluntary. Typical odds ratio. And a stack of defenders must be attacked as a whole. But attacking units, it can be any you select. You could have a stack of 3 units and only use 1 to attack. So you've got flexibility there. Multiple hex, all got to be adjacent. Terrain effects, and actually the terrain effects come into play with this. Now this I've seen in the previous quads, where depending on the terrain the defender's in, that determines which one of these rows to use. And then there is this German initiative die roll. At the beginning of the attack, due to the surprise, they get better results shifting up 1, but then it comes down here to the standard die rolls. And if you look at this, these are the losses. Attacker on the left, defender on the right. And the defender can convert these losses into retreat hexes. So let's say they got a 3 result. They could lose 3 steps, or they could lose 2 steps and retreat 1, or lose 1 step and retreat 2, or lose no steps and retreat 3. But advance after combat is pretty fast. Mech units can pretty much follow them, and armored units get an extra advance after combat too, so gotta be careful. Okay. Oh, and they explain them here. Let's see. Yeah, engaged. Good enough. There we go. There's advance after combat, and then, like I said, infantry units can only advance 1 hex into the defender's hex. Mech, infantry, and cav may be advanced full length of the path of retreat. And now, armor and recon units may be advanced 1 hex further than the number of hexes of retreat. Additionally, they may deviate from the path of retreat after the first hex. That's a big one. Now this is interesting. Regardless of what type of victorious units are, their advance must stop immediately upon entering an enemy zone controlled hex. So they can't advance through other enemy EZOCs. That's slightly different than what we're used to here. Stacking restrictions apply during the combat phase. Talk about an E. Here's a divisional integrity bonus I talked about. initiative bonus, the Germans during certain turns. Then we have the artillery. They can both add to an attack and add to defense, and they can do just a barrage attack. Similar, we've seen in other SPI games. And then, yeah, and as long as they aren't adjacent, they don't get the detrimental effect. But there has to be a friendly unit adjacent to even do a barrage attack, I guess, for spotting. Let's see. And normally you're only allowed to apply one artillery unit per combat, except for the Germans in the beginning of certain scenarios where they can pile on all artillery units in range. Barrage attack by itself, 2 or 3 result. You got to have that at least. Here's the combined attacks. Final protective fire here. Yep, defensive strength. And let's see. And if an artillery unit is attacked while in battery, it uses SPF strength for defense. Out of battery, it has a defensive strength. And we did talk about battery status here. Must be placed in battery to fire, out of battery to move, and then supply. It's made during that first phase of the player turn, and it applies for the rest of it. And supply is basically 4 hexes to a road, and then from the road to a supply source. And it's not 4 MPs, it's 4 hexes. So all these are, yeah, let's take this guy for example. He's not on a road hex, but 1, 2, and then off we go. Wherever the supply sources are. So 4 hexes to a road, and then any terrain, and then from that to a supply source as defined by the scenario. Artillery zones of control do not block the tracing of supply lines. Nice. And then they talk about the German supply source is basically the edge of the map. And then let's look at out of supply and isolation. And there's a difference there. Unit can be out of supply and it just operates not at full efficiency. Unit that is out of supply attacks at half strength and it moves half. Round fractions up. Defense strength unaffected. Okay, so if you're out of supply, your attack and your movement are halved. Now a unit that's isolated, which we have to define here, an isolated unit, all 3 of the following. Unable to trace a supply line, so it's out of supply. Totally surrounded by enemy units or zones of control on all 6 adjacent hex sides. That's the big one. And then more than 3 hexes from a friendly supplied unit. That's interesting there. But that eventually becomes Baston, for example. But then the Allies can do air supply. But when you're isolated, then that is problematic here. Its defensive strength may never be reduced below 1. Isolated may not attack, defends at half strength, and may not move. Well, it's trapped by Zox. So it's defending at half. That's a good chance then to reduce, and take a shot at, eliminating them. And so that's isolated. Then we talk about the German supply shortage, and I showed you that chart there. And then bridges are a big thing. You can both build bridges and blow bridges up. And basically you start in the build phase, put it on, and it takes a certain amount of times. Any unit can do it in general, but in the Bulge 44, only German engineer units, which would probably be this. Yeah, that's motorized engineer. They could build a bridge if they needed it. Unit with a bridge building arc around it may only be moved or may not be moved. So you got to stay there and build it. May not attack. Bridges may be built across a hex side that's got enemy controlled hex. And if an enemy unit becomes adjacent to them, they have to stop building. Bridge blowing, and that's pretty much a roll. 1 to 3, it's destroyed. And I think if you're adjacent, then it's a 1 to 4. If an engineer unit is attempt to blow a bridge or a unit of any type is adjacent to the bridge hex side, 1 to 4. So you can blow from 2 hexes away. And that's important for the Allies. And they give you an example here, blowing up bridges, improve positions. Just give you a 2-column shift like a town. They have to be occupied. Again, they're built and during the build phase, and then at the end phase, as long as they haven't been attacked during the ZOC, then they appear also. And then we got air power. Okay, let's see. A player may not use more than 1 air point for the same exact operation in a game turn. No more than 1 interdiction may be made against the same hex, and also add to. So we got our air interdiction, and there is a table for that. Yep, there it is. So add 1 if all units are non-mech, which, yeah, increasing. This is kind of an interesting split here. You roll a die and then you go across and everything applies. Interdicting means it's not a road hex anymore. And then if there's a unit in the hex, could be lose 1 step dispersed or dispersed. And if you're dispersed, you can't move. Subtract 2 if a unit in the hex is in march mode. There we get the idea of strafing columns right there. So be careful where you go in march mode here. And then you've got typical combat support. Let's see. And then the air supply for the campaign game, for the Allies, reinforcements. And then they've got optional rules, forced march, elite troops, infantry truck pools. Okay, so that's kind of a brief through the rules here, and I'm already at 27 minutes. But what I come out of this is this game has meat to it. So, you know, they're simulating a lot here, the interrelationships. So this game is, you know, it's I don't know what I want to say. It's crunchy, it's meaty. It feels like you've got a lot of decisions to make, and it simulates to a reasonable extent, you know, what actually is going on. So looking here, we look at the scenarios, and this got a lot of nice stuff. This is almost like a campaign study that for the whole game when you read it. Here's the diagrams of the actual attack. Here's the St. Vith battle folio. Here's Clairvaux, I think that's how you pronounce it, and the approaches to Bastogne. And then, you know, different rules for each. Here's the one I've got on the board here, Selles. And the Germans are kind of coming up here and rushing for the Meuse. And then they've even got Sedan 1940, Darien, which they simulate same battleground here. And you see an example of the battle here too. Let's see, player's notes, good stuff here. There's a lot, and then here's a nice sequence of play. And then they have campaign rules and a whole historical background document to this. And here's the intro to the campaign games. So they add some more rules here for that. German paradrops, special rules. So there's a lot here. So, campaign, let's see. And then they have this long study here on the actual battle. So I still think this game was ahead of its time. It does use some of the common stuff that SPI was doing at the time, but it adds more. So let's see. So I'm at 30 minutes. So I think that's long enough here to kind of give you a quick overview of the rules. But I'm going to go ahead and in my next video in this series, hopefully I'll crank through this during the holidays. I'm going to look. I've been playing the Selles one here a little. Next video I may show some of the game mechanics on that. But ultimately, I think I'm going to end up picking either St. Vith or Clairvaux to play, do a playthrough too during this bulge time, and do some videos on that. So anyway, with that being said, hopefully this piqued your interest on actually a good game from 1978. Take a look at it. You got the BGG side. There's also, I think it's spygames.net, where you can get all these old SPI games. You can see I got a PDF. I own a physical copy, but here's a PDF, and it has scans of everything, the map, the whole 9 yards. But like I said, there's also a good Vassal module, and I would be shocked if there wasn't a tabletop simulator module. So stay tuned amongst all the other stuff I'm doing. I do want to get this kind of bulge game in, kind of like I did for Market Garden. Back when that was going down, I played SPI's game for that. I think it was called Arnhem. And then they later renamed it A Bridge Too Far. So, anyway, stay tuned. And when I come back, hopefully in the next few days, we'll launch into one of these playthroughs here, and you can see all the rules in action. So, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Comments appreciated. And please subscribe if you want to be notified next time I do a recording. Thanks again.